I'm Dugald MacAngus and I'm 85 years old. I married Inge, who came from Germany, and we were married for 52 years. She did have some problems with her kidneys, and she visited Rigmore on a regular basis to have them checked. In 2011, the last time she went up to get her kidneys checked, she got a good report on her kidneys, but unfortunately her blood pressure showed a high reading. The consultant in Rigmore asked me if I would take readings of Inge's blood pressure two or three times a day for a week and deliver it to the local health centre. And I was a bit surprised to find that after the first week, the average readings on her systolic level were between 225 and 235, which I thought was rather high. I said to Inge, I'll come in to see the nurse with you and explain my concern to her. And Inge said, please, don't come in. You'll only make a fuss. They're looking after me. When she came out of the health centre, I said, how did you get on with the nurse? And she said, well, the nurse said to me, tell that husband of yours to keep away from the monitor and learn how to do it yourself. The next week, the blood pressure was high and still going higher, up to 235. And I said to Inge, I'm really coming to see the nurse with you. She said, please not. Well, I said, I'll give you a letter to give to the nurse. So I said to the nurse on my letter, please, please, nurse, I'm very concerned about Inge's high blood pressure. She's in high stroke territory. And unless somebody does something quickly, we're in deep, deep trouble. That was on the Thursday. And on the Monday morning, at 10:30, she took the stroke. The helicopter came for her, 8-minute flight in the helicopter from Ballantour to Inverness. And I drove up in the car, which takes about an hour. On the Saturday morning, 5 days after she had taken the stroke, I visited her in the morning about 10 o'clock. And I discovered that there was all the white food or liquid that normally goes in through a pipe through her nose had become detached. And a large pool of this white liquid on top of the bed. So I ran to get a nurse and I said, nurse, what on earth is happening? And the nurse looked at me and said, you shouldn't be here at this time, it's not visiting time. And I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to be able to put the tube back in again? She said, well, I can't put it in unless it's x-rayed to be sure that the tube is not in her lung and in her stomach. And I said, well, can you do that? She said, well, I don't know if the x-ray people are on duty on a Saturday. And after 2 hours, when I was just about going off my head with worry, I decided to run down to the accident and emergency, explain to a very nice doctor there, who said, I'll sort it out for you in 10 minutes, but I'll have to report this because it's really quite serious. By Monday, it was decided that her medical condition had stabilised and they put her back to the stroke ward. While in the stroke ward, the service up there, it was just absolutely first class. Sympathetic, caring, showing compassion. I went up every day for the next 2 months to Inverness, back and forth. But spending all day looking at Inge and hoping that she would open her eyes and hoping she would speak, I think I was becoming emotionally quite tired and exhausted. So I think, as much as for my benefit as for Inge's, they decided that they would transfer her to Invergordon. Invergordon is a county hospital in a beautiful, tranquil setting. Beautiful views looking over the Cromarty Firth. Spotlessly clean hospital, lovely friendly receptionist, and a speech therapist that really should get a gold medal, and an absolute fantastic physio. And you would say, well, what could possibly go wrong? But I'm sad to say just about everything did. The biggest problem at Invergordon was that the head nurse decided that Inge should be put into a single room. Now, my wife was a very gregarious person, and I knew she would go crazy in a room on her own. But no, it was decided that the nurses knew best. They wanted to leave her in a room. And the problem I had with her being in a room was that they wouldn't even switch on the television for her, and they wouldn't switch on the radio for her. Because of the kind of stroke she had, I tried to explain to the nurses that she didn't know the difference between yes and no. Do you want the television on, Inge? She may have wanted it, yes, but she would have said no. And I tried to explain that to the nurses, that they really must put it on, even without the sound. Because you can imagine in a room with 4 walls, no television, no radio, anyone would go crazy. And I forecast that she would become depressed. I did have a feeling that the nurses, a few of them, always gave me the impression that they knew best. But I tried to tell them, after being married to someone for 50 years, that I really did know how my wife breathed and talked and thought. And when they wouldn't switch on the radio and the television for her, I put polite notices up on the wall or on the mirror saying, "Thank you for switching on the television for Inge," hoping that they might do it. When I'd come in, the notice was switched off the wall and the television is still not on. She was in the single room for about a week, and I got a phone call to say, "Dugald, just to tell you that we found Inge lying on the floor this morning." I said, "How long had you been lying there?" And they said, "We haven't got a clue." Now, if she'd been in a bigger ward, obviously someone would have noticed this, but the problem was, and I'm quite sure this would happen, they didn't have the side of the cot up. And when she fell on the floor, she was black and blue and very distressed. But added to that, she had a specially adapted wheelchair for herself with a safety belt across the waist. She fell out of the wheelchair 5, if not 6 times, which really was quite unforgivable. And the problem there was, when I said, "Well, who saw her last, or did they not strap her in?" and all of trying to identify whose job it had been to see that she was secure, but no one could tell me. And as far as the wheelchair was concerned, there was a buckle going across, and the nurses tried to tell me that Inge must have found a way of pushing a button and opening it, but that would be impossible because she was paralysed. So I came up with a Heath Robinson kind of idea. So I cut the toe off a sock, put the sock over the button, and then tied the belt, then pulled the remaining part of the sock across the top of the clasp. So there was no way she would come to the top of the button. But each time I went in, the sock was missing. So it was quite clear that they didn't approve of my being involved. Another issue I had with them, because she was paralysed down one side and she couldn't eat properly, there was a large sign on the side of her wall, Iggy must be supported with meals. The meal time was about 12:30. I would go in there at 2 o'clock and sometimes find her with congealed grease all over her face, uneaten food down her blouse, with her unappealing eyes, saying, "What is happening to me?" And she would be beginning to lose her dignity and self-esteem. One of the more embarrassing things for a patient is if they do a poo in visiting hours. And one day I was in and I said to Ingy, "Have you done a poo?" She looked at me and said, "Uh-huh." So I ran out to get a nurse and I said, "Nurse, I wonder if you'll come and help me, please." Because Ingy said, "Oh, we're very busy, but we'll come as soon as we can." I went out the next hour and the next hour. 3 times I went out after 3 hours and no one had come. Another day I said to Ingy, trying to be positive, "The nurses are very nice to you, Ingy, aren't they?" And she looked at me with those very soulful eyes. And she said, "Yes, when you're here." Now I just about cried. So when I came home, I wrote a letter to the doctor and the staff to say that I was exceptionally upset about this lack of care for my wife. Another day I came in and I heard this awful moaning and crying. And I said, "Who on earth is that, I wonder?" And as I came round the corner, there was Ingy in her room, rocking back and forth, howling for her mother. So I ran out to get a nurse and I said, "Nurse, what on earth is happening to my wife?" And the nurse looked at me, apparently quite unconcerned, and said, "Oh, she's been like that all morning." Now, really, when it got to that stage, and she was making quite good progress on the physio side and with the speech therapy side, but each time she fell and became distressed, she began to sort of become more inward and didn't want to do physio anymore. So I decided that I would take her home. So about September of that year, the house was ready for Ingy. So I rubbed my hands, went to see the lady who was in charge of carers who would have to come in and see her in the morning and in the evening to give her a wash and put her to bed. I looked after all her medicine and her cooking and her cleaning and everything. So I went to see this lady, but she immediately gave me the impression that, look, I couldn't tell her when Ingy should be coming home, which took me a little bit aback because I thought that would be a very simple thing. I pleaded for her to let Ingy come home and provide the carers. All the rest of the hospital staff agreed that Ingy could go home. This lady in charge of the carers wouldn't answer my telephone. My son said to me, "Look, Dad, I'll try." So he'd phoned her 9 times from London and each time she didn't respond. So I was becoming pretty desperate. But at the end of the day, I did get the carers who turned out to be like angels. They really, really looked after her. So every day I would make Ingy's breakfast. We shared porridge together, tea, toast and honey together. And I would give her her medicine, and then I would put 2 or 3 phials of distilled water through the peg in her tummy, 16 a day. And the carers would prepare her, and I would take her out into the chair and out into this room where we're sitting here. And I was hoping that when she got home, that seeing everybody passing the windows and giving a little wave to them, that she would come alive again. But she was too far gone. The damage had been done. She realised that she wasn't going to make it. And about just before Christmas time, 3 months after she came home, she decided to stop eating. And you can't imagine anything worse than to see someone that you loved just absolutely dying in front of you. You just felt so hopeless. And after she stopped eating, it was 2 weeks or so later, and we had our 2 beds beside each other in the room. I could hear her being restless, and I said to Ringy, "Are you in any pain?" And she indicated that she was. So I said, "Well, I've got some strong medicine from the doctor, which I can give you." Normally she didn't like taking medicine, but she said, "Thank you." So I prepared the medicine for her, and as I was giving it to her, she took the medicine, and then she looked up at me and she said, "Dugald, will you please hold me and kiss me?" And I looked at her and I said, "I'll hold you until you go to sleep." And that was the last words we ever spoke. And the grief was just indescribable.